I'd like to just kind of ask if there's anyone here that can remember back 71 years. I know there isn't, because you were all living with your heavenly parents in the spirit world then. But it was 71 years ago, like it was 3 months. January 1st, 1928. And something at that time happened. I was introduced to Grandpa.
He told me many times that his whole life he felt surrounded by just really good people.
Mother died when I was 2, and Father died when I was 3. And of course, Mother was only 26 or barely when she died, so she was just a young lady. But everyone talked about how beautiful she was and how much in love Father and Mother were. But Father only lived a year after Mother died, and his one friend says, you know, the doctors may not believe this, but I believe that it just kind of broke his heart when Mother died.
You show the picture of them?
My brother Leroy and I were there, and Grandma and Grandpa called us and said to come into the bedroom. And Roy and I would have been 3 years old, and Roy would have been 5. And they had us get up to Father's bed, and Father looked at us both and wanted to give us a kiss, and then I remember just as clear as anything, he said, now, be good boys. But at times when I'd get a little anxious and a little concerned about just where my parents were, what they were doing, and when I had questions that I'd like to ask them, I'd go out, climb up in the tree, get up as high as I could, and I always felt like I was getting closer to them. And as I would get up there, I felt that I could visit with them. And I had a strong feeling that it was a great advantage to have them so available, and that they were watching me and watching over me, that they were interested in me. You mentioned how did I feel about being an orphan. I really knew that my parents were not living here like so many of the others were, but I never felt like I was really an orphan. I had parents, and I just appreciate so much what the bishop and others of Father's friends would tell me about him, and about how much they loved him and how much they learned from him, and how good a teacher he was. And I felt like, you know, he's teaching me too.
We lived on 3rd East and 3rd North in what we called the clinker brick home. I was born out in a little farm home on the road to Springfield. But we lived there in the clinker brick home from the time I was about 2 on. And in the back, we had a huge garden stock, and we had cows, and we had chickens. And we used to drive the cows to the pasture, And in the evening we'd drive them back. And we used to deliver milk. We milked the cows and sell it to the neighbors. The little girl would deliver the milk. And we'd gather the eggs. And of course we always had a huge garden. And we'd help with that. And in those days I think it was quite typical that Mother would can hundreds, I mean really hundreds of 2-quart bottles of everything you can imagine. But I think we just kind of did that. But you know, that was just part of our living, and we were always singing songs, and it was a happy experience. I guess we were a little spoiled.
All of us remember this so well that Mother sometimes before the day had really started their house early in the morning would nearly always, or very often at least, take us for little walks. And sometimes it was up at Temple Hill, and sometimes it wasn't even very far, but we'd look at the flowers along the ditch bank and see how beautiful everything was. But she would always be teaching us something important about life and about Heavenly Father, so that everything we did was kind of tied up with Heavenly Father, the things that He wanted us to do. And life seemed very wonderful because you always had Heavenly Father. No matter where you were, He was with you and watching over you.
I'm sure we had, problems and things, but as I look back on it, we were the happiest family you can imagine. We just were. There was a real sweet spirit in our home. We all had our work to do, and we did it. But we had a lot of fun. I'm sure we must have quarreled a little bit, but I can't remember that part very much. I would say it was be all joy.
There are lots of things I tried to do that Jennie, because Jennie thought I could do them. She'd say, sure you can. And and so that was a big help to me. And I majored in drama, and the whole reason I majored in drama was because Jennie had majored in drama.
Mother was saying that, she said, the only reason I majored in drama was because I was so shy. And I thought that if I did that, I would learn to not be so shy.
And it probably did.
And she was,
Father realized he didn't have his Sunday paper, and we weren't supposed to shop on Sundays, but he had to have that paper. So he told me to run to uptown and get him a Tribune, I think it was. He said it'll cost a dime. And the only change he had was a $10 bill. And he said, I think I can trust you. You should wrap it up carefully in your handkerchief, And so I just went on uptown and bought the Tribune. And I took the $5 bill in change and held it tight in this hand. And then I took my hanky that I was supposed to wrap the change in and very carefully wrapped up $4.90 and tied it in my hanky. So I hurried on home, and Father had made the journey in such a quick time that he was still outside really arguing with one of the neighbors about something he didn't fit in Sunday school class.
About the gospel doctrine class.
They used to really argue. And I said, we used to call him Papa. Papa, here's your paper. And he just took it. He was still involved in this argument. And then when I went to give him the change, all of a sudden I realized I didn't have the $5 bill in my hand. Well, in those days, $5 was a huge amount of money. I remember I thought, oh, I've lost that $5 bill. And he was still involved. I hurried in the house. This is the way our mother had trained us. And I remember in Mother's bedroom, there was an extra big closet. And I went into that closet and closed the door, and I knelt down and I prayed. I was desperate. I said, Heavenly Father, I've got to find that bill. I've got to find it fast. And then I said, thank you, Heavenly Father, for helping me. And I got up and I walked out, just positive, I'd find it. And I hurried as fast as I could, but looked all over the sidewalk up at Jennie's. And I walked through the house again, and I sat down in that black chair. No one was home yet. And I looked down, and there was the $5 bill on the floor. You've heard me tell this. And so I hurried back and gave him the full change. But then I went back into that closet. This is the way Mother taught us, And I knelt down and I said, oh, Heavenly Father, thank you so much. I knew you would.
I think I always held Jennie in a way kind of in awe because I knew Jennie would never do anything bad. Even the time I was little, I knew that, I always felt like she was such a perfect person that always did everything right. And yet, very sweet and loving. But I was a little bit in awe because I was always thinking of such interesting problem things to do.
They didn't have 11 all at once. I was to college when Gloria number 10 was born. And so the most they would have had was 10. But the whole secret of it is so simple. Just have Mary and Julia come first and then have them tend the kids.
How did she announce when there was a new baby on the way? I mean, what was there a ritual? Was it?
No. Well, do you know, I only remember one time, which was a dramatic time, because she told us a story about her mother, and how this beautiful, and I remember, so she tried this with me, and I don't know if Mary was there, but she was saying, and we're going to have another baby, and I said, oh no, don't we have enough? and Mother was just devastated, how could I? So I'm sure there were other times, but that's the one I remember.
Most everybody else's parents that I was friends with were at an age where those parents could have been children of my parents. When the older kids were young, there were probably a lot more physical and recreational sort of things. In fact, I remember finding an old shotgun down in the basement that I understand Dad used to go hunting with, but it was quite different. I think Louis and Gloria and I probably had similar experiences in that setting, with the parents being a little bit older. Mother did take up skiing when she was about 50, I think, in an effort to try to get us to feel that she was still spry and able to do those sort of things. That didn't last very long. Dad went hiking with me once and got a lot of blisters on his feet, and I certainly don't feel deprived at all. I feel more honored that they would, they really did everything they could to be to provide as good of a home, as fun of a home, as as to do the best they could. And I think, on the contrary, it was probably my selfishness and expectations that they should be able to do everything the 30 and 40-year-old parents were doing when my parents were 60.
When I got a little bit older, then Mom would leave me with the children. And not to single out David, but he kind of came in the position where he was the one that would be the most imaginative in his tricks. I remember one very disruptive time when Mom and Dad left me with the children. They probably went to conference, and I tried to make rules and tell them what to do, but Mom had made it very clear, these are my kids and you can't punish them. I puzzled, how can I discipline them if I can't punish them? And this one time David wanted to go swimming in the yard. I don't know how he was going to make a swimming pool in the yard. But I said, no, you can't. I was trying to exercise my authority. And the next thing I knew, water started dripping down from the upstairs into the downstairs. And he had built his swimming pool on one of the mattresses on one of the beds upstairs.
I always worried about my friends coming, because some of them were kind of mean and would talk about, oh, what a messy place,
I asked Mother one day if she didn't have any social consciousness about having so many children and having children so late, and she replied to me that definitely it was a mistake, that she should have stopped at 10.
If I were left alone, if Mother went someplace, which would happen quite often, and I really loved that. I loved when I was just in charge. And I would go put them up in the tub. They were all little boys, And then I would clean the front room. That was always my thing. And then I would get them out, dress them all in clean clothes. Yeah, there was a lot of chaos, a lot of energy, a lot of noise, a lot of clutter.
I think Mom and Dad, and especially Mother, tried her very best to be supportive and be right there with the younger parents at the football games, and it wasn't always easy for them. But they would sit there in those cold bleachers and cheer for me. I don't think they had a clue what was going on in the games.
I've felt that Mother had such faith that what she was doing was right. This was her high calling, and
raising
to have as many children as were sent to her, and that though there were hard times, she'd seen her mother do it, and she had such respect for her mother.
The other thing I loved when I got to be a little bit older, I loved to rock and hold George when he was a little baby. That was I felt really important if I was able to hold the babies.
I remember his telling me once, he said, I figure you have a big family and most of them turn out. That's pretty good or something. So, but Mother doesn't think that. It's everyone.
When I was a Boy Scout, I knew I could never get my first class, let alone my Eagle, because I couldn't swim. And as a Boy Scout, I think we were Boy Scouts at 11, maybe 12, and I couldn't swim. Everyone else that I knew, my friends, they could swim. And so I asked Dad once, I said, can you take me up to Heisey Hot Springs to practice swimming? Now, just being a young 11-year-old or 12-year-old, I didn't really realize how busy my dad was. He was probably the bishop at the time, or had other church responsibilities. He had his work that he was developing, his own business. He had all the other kids. But he dropped all of that the very time I asked him, just dropped whatever else he had, and he drove me all the way up to Heisey Hot Springs. I don't know how far it was. Do you remember how far away that was, Julia? Or do you even remember Heisey Hot Springs?
Remember it, yeah.
But it was quite a ways away. Just Dad and I. And he started to teach me how to swim. And I remember the first thing I learned was just to float, so I didn't have the fear of the water. So I could just float. And then gradually I'd learn to swim. But he would constantly do things like that.
One fairly early memory that really shows what Dad is like is they had got a babysitter, a young girl who lived across the street. And this babysitter, while they were gone, anyway, when they came back, she was asleep on the couch. And instead of waking her up, Dad carefully picked her up and carried her home.
when we were playing, Lewis and some of the boys in the neighborhood were playing baseball in our backyard, and Dad just came in and started pitching the ball and batting the ball, and it was quite a revelation to realize that he really knew how to play baseball. I never really even thought that that was a possibility, that he could actually know how to play baseball. I would just accept that he was born before baseball was even invented, and but he was great. He was a great player.
You were mentioning a poem you remember, Grandpa.
It was about the old owl, and it goes something like this. There was an old owl who sat in a tree as quiet can be. The longer he sat, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he listened. The more he listened, the more he heard. Oh, why can't we be like that wise old bird? And Dad always would make sure the rhymes were obvious. That wise old bird. And I think that Dad was a very, very good listener.
Yes.
He was the kind of listener that wasn't always trying to find the next thing to say, but he would actually respond to what you were saying. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very unusual to have a listener like that, because usually people are going to tell you the next thing and they're planning it out what to tell you. But he was a very, very good listener, so I think he was like that wise old bird.
I think you are too.
But I don't remember Grandpa ever getting particularly mad, although when he did get mad, we would have dinner, and if there was some fighting at the dinner table, Grandma would say, "Delbert, do something to control these kids." And Dad would say, well now. And then Grandma would say, "Do something, Delbert." And so Dad would get up, and the thing he would do in that type of crisis was get the worst offender, which was usually David, and twist his ear. Twist his ear. And I'm sure I got a few ear twistings myself.
He would say, "Now, never mind. Now you just never mind."
Is that all?
Well, I remember being pinched on the ear and pulled really hard. But no, he was never. I never remember him ever hitting or being physical, but definitely he would raise his voice and he would insist on compliance, and usually got it.
You know, David was kind of rebellious at a point of time, which caused a lot of turmoil and stress in the family. I remember once he stole the family car. I don't know if you can steal a family car, but he would take it without permission on a Sunday instead of going to church, and he's driving down 12th Street, and Grandpa came out and stopped him and said, "Now you get out of this car this minute." And David was very rebellious and threatened back and said, if you make me get out now, I'm going to go right down and to the Army enlistment place and enlist in the Army, and you'll never see me again. And Dad just backed off and said, "Drive safely," or something to that effect, and let him go.
So what I remember about discipline is Mom's telling Dad quietly and kind of privately that I'd done something wrong, and then Dad taking me aside and speaking to me very quietly and very persuasively about what I had done wrong. And man, I would do everything right to avoid one of those lectures.
This is one thing that I was really impressed with Dad, is that we were coming from Lewiston to go back to wherever we were staying, Kamai or Kuskia or some darn place, and there was a hitchhiker. And Dad picked up this hitchhiker, and he was just, you know, I don't know, University of Washington or Washington State type of guy, and he was all dirty and had his pags and everything, and he wanted to smoke, and Dad says, no, you can't smoke in our car. And while we were driving, he was kind of telling about where he wanted to go to Europe and everything, and it was like, I don't know, 1970 or 71 or some darn thing, and so it was kind of the hippie movement. And Dad just told him, he said that he should clean up, take a good shower, shave off his beard, and get a job. you know, a good, honest job. You know, and I think this guy was just flabbergasted, and I was kind of flabbergasted. I was kind of impressed that Dad didn't have any gumption in letting him know what he thought.
I do have a memory of Dad that was just really special. I remember when I went to BYU, I actually, my first year was good. It was the second year I got very depressed. Didn't even know that's what it was then. That's what it was, you know, but looking back, I had I got depressed, very depressed, and I had to come home, and I just felt so bad about, you know, that, and not being able to continue school, and but it was to the point where I couldn't, and so I came home, and I just remember went for a walk with Dad. He wanted to go for a walk with me, and he shared with me a time when he had I don't remember specifically what it was, but it was a time where he hadn't finished something. It might have been school, or, you know, where he failed. He shared with me that. And that meant so much to me. It was such a comforting thing to me, because I felt like such a failure, and yet there wasn't anything I really could do about it that I knew of, you know, at the time. And for Dad to share that with me just meant the world to me, because I respected him so much. And so I felt like, you know, if he had that kind of experience and look where he is now, you know, there's hope for me. And that is an experience that I will always cherish. I just really appreciated him just sharing that with me.
If I've described Dad as being mild-mannered and patient and very careful to never give offense, Mother wasn't necessarily the mirror image of that, but you always, at least I always sensed quite a bit more intensity and clear-cut goals and a sense of time evaporating from Mom. Now, I'm not saying that positive or negative for either one of them, but I think that they did each have a little different personality in that regard. And you probably all remember this. Doth thou love life? You remember? Do not squander time. That's the stuff life is made of. Well, that never came from Dad, did it? No. I think that came from Mom.
But I remember climbing up high into the cupboards. We had, in our kitchen, we had the wall cabinets that were normal height, and then there were cabinets on top of those, clear up, so you'd have to have a ladder or climb, a kid would, to get up to them. And I'd got all the way up and found the Christmas candy, and I was just elated, you know, that I'd found it. But I got caught before I got all the way down by Mom, and she was very, very stern, and I was just screaming mad that I didn't get to have the candy. And so I was pretty much out of control. You know, I didn't want her walking in the kitchen at the moment she did. It must have been that. It's hard to say, but I remember that she put her hands on her hips, and she told me to settle down, to behave myself, you know, to stop, because I think I might have been physically fighting against her, you know, to not let her take the candy away from me that I'd retrieved, but I don't remember exactly. But I do remember that she finally just kind of calmly said something to the effect of, "By the authority of the priesthood invested in my husband, I command the evil spirits to leave you." And it did kind of shock me out of my temper tantrum.
You know, the thing that amazed me about Mom is even when I was off my mission, you know, my friends, I remember I was working this one job that I worked from like 9 o'clock at night or till 7 or 8 in the morning. We'd have a break around midnight. Mom would stock our refrigerator with like oranges and apples, and she says, "Bring your friends, you know, from the break and have grapes or different things, you know," and they just thought, my word, you know, our parents would never allow us to come, you know, and have grapes and apples and bread and different things. But she loved to have your friends come by. You know, it was amazing.
I think Mother very much lived in the real world, even though sometimes I think we thought she didn't. She lived in this idealistic world, but I wasn't that popular with always like having dates to all the dances, but it was very important to me. And so I always would come home for lunch, even though there was lunch available at all of the schools. But even in high school, I would walk home for lunch and then walk back. And that would be the lunch hour, which was an hour. And a lot of the kids that didn't come home for lunch would just stay and socialize, you know, because lunch didn't last for an hour. But I was complaining this one day that I was feeling so bad because I didn't have a date to this dance. And as we finished up, it was, you know, I was going to walk back to school, and Mom said, "I'm just going to drive you back today." So she drove me back, and right there in front of IF High School, she dropped me off with these instructions. She said, "Now just go in there and flirt and you'll get your date." So I think I ended up getting a date. I don't know if that particular couple of 20 minutes maybe got me the date, but it was like, okay, that's how you do it.
When Mom and Dad met Bonnie was an interesting story. That was, we came in and woke them up at night and said we were engaged, and Mom bounced right up out of bed and said how happy they were, and then she asked Bonnie how old she was, and Bonnie was just 19 at the time, and Mother said, "Just right." And then she said, "How tall are you?" And Bonnie said, 5 feet. She said, "Just right."
And I do remember the one time going on such a trip when I fell out of the car. I have that memory, and I remember how shocked my mother was. You know, she was really, really upset, and I was in. As I remember the incident, it's a kind of a family memory, but I remember, and it was typical of me. I probably was a little bit rebellious, and Mother said, "Don't put all the gum in your mouth," or something like that, and I did anyway, and so she made me throw it out. Or maybe I was supposed to share the gum with somebody and I didn't. But anyway, trying to open the window, I opened the door instead, and the way the doors opened outward into the wind, it pulled the door out and sucked me out of the car. And I actually remember bouncing, you know, I have some memory on the road, and then the next thing I remember was being in the doctor's office and being paddled on my behind to get me to cry or to come out of being unconscious. And Mother was just beside herself. I was more worried about her than myself because she thought that something was really, really, really wrong. And of course, maybe it was a close call and really scary for a young mother.
When there were these electrical storms and the lights would go out, and she would gather us about her and light a candle and rock the baby in the rocking chair, and didn't want us to be nervous, but I think she's the only one that would have been nervous.
I could share so many stories about Mom. I'll tell you one that probably no one has heard because I don't think I've ever told it before. But I remember coming home from primary. We'd walk home from primary. It was held on Wednesday afternoons at probably 4 o'clock after school. And as I was walking home, one of the boys, approximately my age, taught me a bad word, a obscene word, which I had no idea what it meant. And when I walked in the house coming home from primary, Mother was in the living room of the house with some women, and I don't know whether it was like a Relief Society presidency meeting or there were some other women there in the room, and they were visiting. And I walked in. How old would have I been? Maybe again like 6 years old or 5 years old or something. And right off the bat decided to try this new word I had just learned walking home from primary from my primary friends. And it was to me like a flash of lightning. I had no time to think, to apologize, to regroup, to give an explanation or anything. I was instantly grabbed, taken from the room, taken 3/4 of the way up the stairway, and slapped absolutely silly. Now, Dad never did that. Dad twisted my ear, but I was totally in shock. But I've never used that word again. That word was totally erased from my vocabulary.
When she was having these kids, the children every 2 years, that the Relief Society president got a hold of her, and there was a visitor from Salt Lake, and they were going to visit with her on birth control. And invited her over, and we're explaining some of the facts of life, and Mother just couldn't understand that at all. She says, I'm having these kids because I want to have these kids. And they just couldn't understand why anybody would want to have this many kids.
I always had this sense in working with Mom that here was a very intelligent, capable person who was willing to use that great capacity and that energy to help me.
I remember one of the few times I remember Mom getting pretty upset with me was when I had that room on the very back of the house that didn't have any heat in it, or that kind of they'd closed in something. Anyway, I would stay up late at night and work on electronic type things. I was just fascinated by that. And I remember one night Mom came up and said, "Now get to bed." And so I would turn off the lights and wait until I was pretty sure she was in bed. And I could usually hear there were some squeaks in the floor and the steps. And I remember one night I'd gotten back up and turned the lights on and was working away at this. It was an old 78 RPM record player. I didn't build the record player, but the amplifier. I'd gotten all the parts and was putting it on. And all of a sudden, here was Mom at the door. I was so engrossed that I didn't hear her. Boy, she was really upset. I told you to go to bed. You can't be a good student if you don't get your sleep, and so on. And I said, "Mom, just listen, just one more thing." And I soldered one more thing. I said, "Just listen." I said, and turned it on. I said, "It works." And I didn't know whether it worked or not because it was, and put it on, put the little needle on, and the sound, and it came through. It worked. I said, "See, Mom, it works." It was Burl Ives singing "Sky Riders in the Sky," or let's see, it was that old song about something about dying, and then he was the bad guy, and so he was sent to hell, and it was
just
Riders in the Sky. That's what it is. Riders in the. Be a good boy, or you'll become one of the devil's riders in the sky, and so forth. And I can remember of Mom. She was really angry, and then when she heard it play, she just softened and said, "That's wonderful, John. Now would you please go to bed?"
In a way, Mother's a perfectionist, and yet not an unrealistic one, but in the sense of being the ideal Mormon mother. You know, this was just very, very important to her.
I went to the BYU from the time I was 4, 2 years of kindergarten, so clear on that. But I remember I had stayed after school till play practice, and a young man by the name of Bill McCord walked me home. He was only about 5 or 6, you know. And he said goodbye, and I went in. Bobby said, "Wasn't that Bill McCord?" I said, "Yes." And he and I had the lead in a play at BYU sometime later. I had no personal interest in him at all. But I remember Father said, "You know, he's a nice young man, but he's not a Mormon." So, you know, we don't date young men, obviously just barely starting today. Oh, I knew that, you know, and I didn't even need to be reminded, but he just wanted to make it very certain that I understood those particular things.
Yeah, she had a pretty black and white view of a lot of things, and yet, you know, if there was an excellent music teacher who wasn't a member of the church, and maybe who had smoked something, that was not a problem. If they were an excellent teacher. It was better if they weren't a member of the church. You know, bless her heart, she was so good, just so totally good, and so wanted her children to be her definition of what they were supposed to be. And you know, I don't know if there was someone who really tried to understand how she felt